First to note is that there are two major types of replication technology in the storage world: local and remote. By local replication, we're talking about snapshots and clones, and we've got a whole lesson dedicated to those. But as a quick reminder here, snapshots and clones are where the source volume and the snapshot volume exist on the same system, and therefore at the same site. So they're of no earthly use to you or to your business continuity plan if you've lost the site that they're hosted at. Remote replication, on the other hand, is where the source volume and the replica volume are located on separate systems and usually at separate sites. And as the image on the slide shows, in order to perform remote replication, of course we need at least two systems, so there's an obvious increased cost involved. But running the business and keeping it running in the event of a disaster or an issue isn't free. In this lesson though, we'll be talking exclusively about remote replication. So even within remote replication, there are two major forms: sync and async, or synchronous and asynchronous. We'll tackle synchronous replication first. Synchronous replication offers us zero data loss. And who can argue with that, right? Surely that's what we all want. However, there's a performance tax levied on synchronous replication. Sync replication usually, and almost always to be honest, does have an impact on overall system performance. Let's take a look at how it works. We'll start out with our main production site with a single host and a single storage array. We're just going to keep it nice and simple for this example. Now let's add in a second site. We'll call this our disaster recovery site, or DR site for short. And to keep the picture simple again, we only show a storage array at our DR site, but in reality we'd need hosts and applications there too. Then we need one or more comms links between the two sites. Multiple comms links or replication links, each taking diverse routes, is the preferred option as long as you can afford to do it. Now let's add a host write, such as an application writing data to a database. As shown on the slide, the host writes data to the storage array at the production site. This write is then replicated from the storage array over the replication link to the remote target array. Once received at the target array, an acknowledgement or an ACK is sent back again over the comms link to the source array, and from there an acknowledgement is finally sent to the host. And what's vital to understand here is that the host and application have to sit around waiting for this final ACK to come back from the source storage array. That's because until the host and the application receive this ACK from the source array, they can't consider the write operation complete. And of course, all of this sending the write across the wire to the target array and then having to wait for the target array to respond all adds latency. And generally speaking, the bigger the distances between your sites, or more accurately, the longer the distances of your comms links between sites, the longer the delay in getting the ACK back to the host. So, short distances between sites incur relatively small performance overheads, whereas larger distances impose larger performance hits. And a good rule of thumb for the maximum distance between your sites for synchronous replication is probably about 100 miles. However, it's just a rule of thumb, and you'll definitely want to consult your array vendor and your application's guidelines, as well as probably speaking either with your telco provider or your network team. And on the topic of the network link, you'll want to give the network bandwidth some thought. For example, most people who choose synchronous replication do so because it offers the potential for zero data loss. However, if you don't size your replication link big enough, you'll drag your performance into the mud. This will happen because if your network link can't cope with the large amounts of traffic you're sending across it, your primary storage array will either have to buffer writes locally while it waits for the bandwidth on the link, all of this increasing the time it takes to get that all-important ACK back to your application, remember, or your array will have to drop down to an asynchronous mode of replication, and if it does that, you'll lose that coveted zero data loss ribbon that we all want. Either way, for synchronous replication solutions, you'll want to size your replication link to cope with your traffic peaks, as it's the only way to guarantee zero data loss and not hammer your performance into the ground. But of course, Network links sized for peak traffic will cost a boatload more than links sized for average throughput. So it's kind of a cost versus functionality decision. Now, let's look at asynchronous replication. The first thing to note about async replication is that there's a good chance it'll lose data for you. But to sweeten that devastating blow, it has zero performance impact. So with sync replication we get zero data loss but a performance hit, whereas with async replication we get potential data loss but zero performance hit. Sadly, you can't have your cake and eat it. Let's take a look at how async replication works. We'll go with the same setup that we had for our synchronous example, a single host and storage array at our production site and a remote disaster recovery site with a replication link between the two. Now let's have our host issue that write to the source array at our production site again. This time though, we get an immediate ACK back from the storage array. None of this hanging around for data to be sent back and forth to the target array over our replication link. And this is the root of both potential data loss and the lack of a performance impact that are characteristics of asynchronous replication. As we can see on our diagram, so far this hasn't protected our write I/O to the target array, meaning that if as things stand we lost our production site and had to bring our services up at the DR site, we'd have lost data. That host write that we've shown on the slide and the data that it contains don't actually exist at the DR site yet, and that's more than slightly worrying. Anyway, at a later point in time, and that delay could be seconds or minutes, our host write is eventually replicated to the remote target array and an ACK is duly returned. So, fundamentally different to synchronous replication. But as we mentioned with synchronous replication, large distances between the source and target arrays bring increasing performance penalties. However, because async replication issues the ACK to the host and the application before actually replicating the data, the distances between our source and target arrays can, in theory, be as big as you like, making async replication solutions ideal options for when you've got, or maybe if you need, to have your data centers more than 100 miles apart. They can actually be thousands of miles apart, and that does happen in the real world. This in turn has an impact on replication link sizing. It's standard practice for replication links serving asynchronous replication solutions to be sized for average rather than peak demand. And this is fortunate because sizing long distance international network links for peak traffic would cost an absolute arm and a leg. Also, the lazy nature of asynchronous replication, where data is replicated after the ACK is issued to the host, allows such solutions to ride out issues with replication links far better than synchronous replication solutions. This is because the host has received the ACK before the data is replicated. If we have issues with the replication link, this has no impact on host performance. It only has an impact on how far behind the production site our DR site is lagging. And you need to be careful here. The business will not be happy if that lag is too long, and rightly so. If the business has signed up for a 5-minute lag and suddenly it's 2 hours, you can't blame them for being upset. And this is where things like multiple redundant replication links come to the rescue, for a cost though. Now, let's take a look at how sync and async replication play into the concept of site redundancy.